Johnny Schillereff, welcome to Adventures in Design and Into the Woods. I am so excited to talk to you, my friend.
Nice to talk to you too. I'm honored.
So let's just start here. I'm 10 years old. It's 1984. Dale Pierce moves to my neighborhood, and I see my first ever living, breathing skateboarder. And then my life is never the same because I learn about skateboarding and I learn about punk rock, which really taught me about community and entrepreneurialism, even though I can't pronounce that word properly. It just changed my life forever. And I remember growing up in Kentucky and looking in the pages of Thrasher magazine and Transworld magazine. Not only did California, where I live now just down the road from you, not only did California seem like this golden dream, but just a land of skateboarders and all these individuals doing very different things. And I was just blown away by the art, the culture, the attitude. I never played team sports. I love that skateboarding was you against the skateboard. You didn't have to worry about letting down your pitcher or letting down your coach. You only let down you if you didn't make it down those 3 steps, or you let down yourself really bad if you didn't make it down 5 steps and you stuck somewhere in the middle. Immediately drawn into it, and it just became a North Star for the rest of my life. So to get to talk to you, somebody who's done so much in skateboarding, I'm just so excited to get to learn more about your story today.
Oh, wow. I appreciate it. That was a great introduction. You gave me a good chuckle. All of that, what you said is very true.
Well, I mean, the thing about being a skateboarder is the sport is only kind of a part of it because it is such a bizarre, like cultural experience for so many of us. And I always look back at like Stacy Peralta and the Bones Brigade, I think is kind of a very pivotal moment in youth marketing. And it taught me everything I would need to know later on as an adult, as an advertiser, as a marketer, as an illustrator, as a business person, because you never felt like you were being sold anything as a child because the advertising and the marketing was so well hidden in the content. You just watched The Search for Animal Chin 1,000 times, Public Domain 1,000 times, Bones Brigade Show 1,000 times. You just watched it over and over and over again, not realizing that you were being marketing to because that's how great the marketing was.
Well, you know your skate trivia really well. I think to a certain degree, a lot of that is actually innocent. I think that with skateboarding and, you fast forward all the way to today, in many ways, we were the pioneers of not only, like you say, punk rock, hip hop, and sort of this unity between a lot of different cultures that at the time, especially, didn't fully exist. And I think part of that marketing that you're talking about was, Stacy Peralta probably was a marketing genius in many ways with Powell and Peralta. But in the same breath, I think a lot of that was just sort of organic. And, I know a lot of other industries quite well, but especially in my younger days, a lot of that is just done through pure enthusiasm. You're just so excited about your product. You're so excited about this, the sport or the activity of skateboarding and the culture that it's almost like by default, you're marketing the product through pure passion. And I think that's what happened with a lot of the things that you're just describing. It wasn't necessarily about trying to sell it. It was just really about doing it through so much passion that people were buying into it.
And I've always tried to sort of embrace that in whatever I was doing. And I've tried to decide to do projects where the love of the project is so sincere that if people buy into it, that's awesome. Because now they're on this voyage with me. And skateboarding just kind of gave me a very different way of looking at things where, no, you think about the end user and the fun and the excitement and how people will want to go on this voyage with you. And if you build that, you'll capture some people along the way. And I do believe you're absolutely right. There was a very organic growth to it. And once again, going back to, was it marketing or content, which is interesting because that's really a blurry line of where you and I exist today in 2023, but we're talking about 1983, 1984. We're going way, way back in the time machine today. But you were a part of the 411 video series. These video tapes that, you rented from the skate shop, you copied from a friend. Dude, skateboarders know everything about tracking on a VHS cassette. You just mess with the tracking over and over again because it's a copy from a copy from a copy. But these videos were like lifelines to kids like me that weren't living in Huntington Beach, you know, and you would just wait and die for one of these new videos to come out. And, you know, there were some of them that were made that weren't even associated to skate companies. And that's what I liked about 411 is it wasn't like, hey, here's the new Santa Cruz roster of skaters. Here's just a bunch of wild guys going out and doing whatever and documenting it. And, you know, you guys also used really great music. So you were getting, you know, because there was a band in my hometown, King Horse, that was featured in one of your videos. I think Tom Knox was skating to King Horse. I'm like, hell yeah, King Horse has made it, man. They're in one of these videos. And so it was just such a moment of like this cultural guide. But that's way ahead of the curve of where we're at today with social media influence and YouTube and TikTok and having a pipeline. Like skateboarding created an internet and a social media before there was an internet and a social media.
Yeah, that's very true. I think with skateboarding videos for sure, and I kind of put a little bit of context with what you were saying, you know, Form 1 was a concept that it was actually more of a need than it was. I mean, sure, it was a business strategy with respect to like creating video content, but really, to their credit, someone by the name of Steve Douglas, Josh Freeberg, a few other, Chris Ortiz, Paul Schmidt, some really sharp people that I was surrounded by, and able to work with during that particular business initiative. But what was being discussed, and I can't remember if it was Josh or Steve, but somebody, one of the people. I always want to make sure I don't try to take all the credit. But someone was like, you know, with Thrasher, and I think at the time Big Brother's skateboard magazine was out, and skateboarding tricks were getting so technical that it was really hard to capture with a camera, like a photograph. So someone over at Big Brother or Thrasher or somewhere started doing screen grabs through filming. So then think of this logic here. You're filming a trick and then you're screen grabbing it in order for it to go into print. So it was like, when you really think it through, it's pretty backwards. So one of the people, and I won't take credit for it, was like, why don't we just show the video? You know, just show the video like we normally do and make a magazine that's in video format. It's serious. It's like kind of crazy when you think about how basic the concept was. So, you know, all of it was like, okay, let's take a Thrasher, a National Geographic, whatever. And like, how do they break this thing up into chapters? And, you know, and it came to big think tank of like, let's create a video magazine. And then, you know, what's the 411? I think at the time that's like a Mary J. Blige song. And like, there was a lot of things about what's the 411, you know, the scoop. So that became the name of the project, 411 Video Magazine. And what happened, I think that's really what you're talking about, is skateboarding is one of the very few cultures, and even to this day, when you look at basketball, even social media in general, the entire skateboarding world was built upon video. You know, like you mentioned, Powell and Peralta and all the Bones Brigade videos, along with like Speed Freaks and videos from the 0 days of Misled Youth and Goldfish with Girl in Chocolate and High Five on the I-5. There's so many skateboard videos that are just iconic. And what happened was, I feel like our entire culture just got built upon that because of the fact that there wasn't, you know, CNN or ABC or Nickelodeon or Disney or, you know, all these things, ESPN that exist in mainstream media. Even back then, you could flip on the TV and watch a Lakers game. And with skate, you couldn't do that. No. You had to go and watch it through a videotape that you had to go and hunt down. So we almost created our own media channel by force. And I think that's a big thing with skateboarding culture in general, action sports sort of down the line. But skateboarding culture, we were sort of forced to create our own channels of marketing, our own channels of graphic design, our own channels of everything. We built our own sort of ecosystem by need and by passion. And that's 411, and that's the sort of video culture. But what's wild about it now is if you fast forward, even to this day, you still can't find sports that are like driven by video, driven by actual video. You don't just watch like a basketball clip.
No.
You know, that's just not a real thing. Maybe one day, but still, that's why I think skateboarding is driven so hard through TikTok and Instagram and all that now, because we already laid the foundation of like, that's how we work, which is really flipping cool.
Well, it's also very digestible where in a 15-second TikTok, you can just watch a guy go down 25 stairs. And if you know nothing about skateboarding, you're just like, how did he not die while he was doing that?
Right.
Johnny, you bring up a very brilliant observation, because there wasn't a network making the content. Skateboarders are making the content, and the pipeline is skateboarders skating, skateboarders filming, distributing, making it, and sending it to other skateboarders. So when mainstream media did get involved and Nickelodeon did Skate TV, it felt so weird because we'd always had a very authentic product. You know, there wasn't this sort of company trying to Disneyfy it and make it all squeaky clean. And, you know, even though I'm sure a lot of sort of the realness was left out of the videos, but when mainstream media did get ahead of it, you're like, okay, cool. Gleaming the Cube, Thrashing, the skate scenes in Police Academy 4. Like, it was fun to see it, but it didn't have that same feeling of like the Sick Boys video, or, you know, one of those like real, like organic, just guys in vans with the lowest resolution. Like, Matt Hensley has a mini ramp in his laundry room in his mom and dad's garage. And like, it was just phenomenal to see that stuff like that, you know?
Mark, I gotta be honest, man, you're blowing my mind right now. I'm loving it. You're talking so my language. It's incredible. Yeah, you're Sick Boys and Matt Hensley. But you're right. I love your skate knowledge. It's actually very relevant to what you're talking about, because what I find, which I love, is that no matter who tries to enter the space, no matter what people try to do, because the sport is, at the end of the day, it's still so young. I mean, people don't realize it's still just so young that it's hard to like understand it or be involved unless you're like a true authentic participant or someone that paid attention to the culture from the beginning. And you can't just absorb skate information very easily. It's not as accessible even now.
Yeah.
People come in from the outside and try to like get engaged or get involved. You know, it's still at a point which I kind of hope it stays this way for a long time, to where you can get called out and you can be unauthentic, and you need to really understand it and love it to be able to market it and tell the stories correctly. And that makes it very special. And, I think music is like that. Music has very similar, when someone knows how to play the guitar, they can listen to the riff and really understand what's going on. And I think skating has a lot of that. And I like sharing skateboarding with the world, and I want as many people to be involved with it as humanly possible. But, there's a piece of me for sure as a person that grew up doing it my whole life. And I've been skating since I was probably 3 or 4 years old or something ridiculous like that. And I'm old now. But yeah, I think that's really special. And I think that it makes even when I'm comfortable calling it a sport, because it is a sport too now. It's everything. It's a sport. It's a lifestyle, depending on actually which part of it you're talking about. But yeah, it makes it fun as a marketeer and as a person that has been involved with it as a brand guy. And I think, to get into like the career, making a career in skateboarding, I'd like to think I'm somewhat smart or a good designer, artist, or whatever. But at the same time, there's a level of timing with a lot of the things that I've managed to do in my life, because some of the things you describe, when no one's making a magazine, when no one's making clothes, making girls' clothes. I mean, that's always a fun one to talk about, because, Element had a girls' clothing line that was spectacular. And people are like, oh, how did you do that? And I'm like, well, I can give the credit to my wife, but she thought of it first. Right.
Yeah. For people that are listening that don't know, Element was the first skate company to make a female line and to really adopt that as like, hey, there's two genders that ride skateboards.
That's
And
right.
we're not just going to put the one clip in our video, like, check it out, it's a girl that can drop in. We're going to actually actively get involved and adopt it. But going back to like, you're talking about the timeline and the timing of things. Another part of skateboarding that you were involved with that I think is a pivotal moment. We're growing up seeing the perfect Powell Peralta graphics. And like, I got to sit in Jim Phillips' garage in Santa Cruz and interview him. And it was amazing because there was one of everything that Jim had designed in the garage. And I'm like, Jim, this is like sitting inside of a Google image search of your subject. And I'd be like, so why'd you put the pumpkin on the Jeff Kindle deck? What, you know, like, it was amazing. But when you were working with New Deal, which, you know, was eventually was Schmidt Sticks, then goes over to New Deal.
Yep.
You guys were on that train that sort of like Todd Swank was on, where the art was like real lo-fi, real sketchy, real scribbly.
Yeah.
And the New Deal, I know that's kind of like a historic term, but it was like really a new deal in skateboarding because it was that moment where it was fractioning up. You know, there used to be like 5 or 6 big companies, and now all of the skaters were starting their own companies. The artwork was getting more lo-fi, it was getting more sassy, and just like New Deal was like such a big deal for kids like me that all we had was street skating. And so now we're seeing Ed Templeton and these scratchy graphics, lo-fi ads, everything's like yellow and black and like sepia. And it really spoke to kids like us that like, oh, wow, there's other people like us that don't have the animal chin ramp in our backyard to go nuts on every day, you know? Yeah. And I just thought that in a sophisticated way, you guys through art, design, and communication put like a real cool lo-fi vibe into skateboarding, which is then it starts to go away from being so glossy and perfect.
Yeah, that was, I mean, you really are digging in there. That was a crazy time. You know, again, back to other people getting the credit. You know, there was an individual by the name Andy Howell and Steve Douglas again, and Paul Schmidt and Ed Templeton and Justin Gerard and a whole bunch of wonderful, incredibly great artists and skaters. What happened around that time, I think, is that, you know, to Paul Schmidt's credit, he was part of that vision camp and Schmidt Sticks, as you mentioned. But what was going on is that was out of California. Everything was really glossy. It was pretty. I kind of call it bubblegum. That's been my phrase for whatever reason. It was very bubblegum.
It fits.
Yeah, it just pink and yeah, it was fun. I mean, I fell into that trap a bit when I was a kid. I loved all that stuff. But, you know, coming from New York, and a lot of us were East Coast, and the Schmidt Sticks team was really big, and there was too many people on the team, and people had ideas of like going off and doing other things. And Paul Schmidt at the time was very entrepreneurial and a great guy, just a great guy that always wanted to help everybody out. So people wanted to do different things. And I also think there was like, I mean, it kind of is funny, but it's budgetary situation too. Like, you don't realize that. Yeah, I remember making photocopies of things and didn't know how to scan things correctly. And so I would put it on a photocopy machine and it would be gritty. And then I'd be like, oh, I don't even know how to use a scanner. And like, I don't know how do you do resolution? I didn't even know. So I didn't know to make it high res or, you know, you might be working on it and you're drawing something on pen to paper and you don't know, you just don't know how to use Illustrator correctly and things just start happening. It's bitmapped, it's sketchy. I remember it would drive me crazy when I would stretch something in Illustrator and I didn't know how to like hold the shift key and do things proportionately, right? So things start happening like accidentally, and then you're kind of like, screw it, or you're just not a good designer yet. So you know things just start kind of clunky coming together. So I think a lot of the things that people were doing now, to Andy Howe's credit, and guys like, there was a person by the name of Gorham, Jose Gomez, Dave Kinsey. I mean, some of these guys were like, you know, Phillips, such great illustrators that no matter how wonky things surrounding the illustration was just like out of control. Now, I wasn't that guy. My drawing style, it's sort of funny because, you know, I jump around when I talk a lot, but it is interesting because what happened to me that was crazy is I was so insecure the opposite of all those guys. I was so insecure about my own illustrations that I started leaning deeper into, oh, well, I'm going to go down the graphic design route.
Yeah.
Because my drawings suck. Their drawings are really good. My drawings are shitty. So I started like kind of walking away from my drawings because I was insecure about them at the time. And I started leaning into like typography and bold colors. And if you look at Element, it started getting so design centric. And that had a lot to do with me actually stepping away from a lot of the people I was mentioning earlier and not feeling comfortable with my own drawing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I went to graphic design school too. So I felt, and I learned how to use a computer because the things I was describing to you earlier, I didn't know how to use a computer yet. I didn't know how to like do all this sort of design work, and it didn't exist in our industry either. So was there such thing as like understanding typography and different font usage? And so then when I finally learned that, I just became obsessed with design, and that kind of became my thing.
It's funny that you say that because I was working this conversation in that direction because, you know, everything in the beginning was graphic. It kind of looked like comic books. Then it got very lo-fi. And I put Element in kind of Alien Workshop as the first vector art skate companies.
Yeah.
And then you started to see graphic design come onto the scene to where, you know, there were the parody decks, there were the troublemaker decks, like, hey, we're going to just do this and get a cease and desist. And there was like the full color, you know, the 4-color process decks that just like, all right, so it's like a Cadillac on a skateboard or it's a Whopper on a skateboard. Like, I don't quite understand this movement in art. But then there was the vibe that you were creating, which was creating a collection of decks that were all from a very similar template, using the color wheel so that the decks all kind of, you know, you're essentially, I always took it this way with Element, that you were designing behind the cash wrap at the skate shop. And you were thinking, if 4 of our decks are lined up, and if 12 and a half inches down, that's where the color dip stops. And the logo, you know, because I always remember seeing your decks lined up at a skate shop and there was a symmetry between them. Whereas any other company, it was chaos, 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 chaos. And in many ways, it made Element stand out because there was, each deck made the other deck stronger. So then you were like, well, am I going to pick it based on the color palette or which one of these pros that I resonate with, or just like, I just like the vibe on this one. So I think that in many ways, because you weren't an illustrator, you took the medium in a whole different direction. And I think when we look at the tremendous success of Element, it was because you had a easier language for people to understand. So many of the other decks before you started designing, Johnny, were like in an inside joke. And if you didn't have the language that you and I know and can speak, you just walked into, say, Zoomies is your point of entry for your first deck ever. A lot of that makes you feel like an outsider, but an Element deck made you feel like you were buying a skateboard and buying into a sport. I hope you don't take that offensive at all, because I think that it was a very smart way to stand out in the marketplace by being about the design and not being about the chaos that skateboarding had represented.
Absolutely. You know, it's funny because you really know your stuff, because you're pointing out some very interesting situations that were very real. The thing that people don't totally know, that's a pretty crazy backstory about Element, especially the design era you're talking about, which ultimately became the look and feel for the brand. And, you know, I say this humbly, but really the industry for many years, you know, to this day, I walk in a shop and I'm like, holy crap, this is crazy that this whole cut and paste, step and repeat, I call it a capsule, the little capsule around the board, even dipped boards and shit like that, like, you know, we did so long ago. It was by force. It started with, I worked alone. I was totally overworked. I just had so many things to do and so many team riders, and I was doing everything. I was a team manager. I was packing boxes. I was, you know, I was a one-stop shop, and sure, there was people around me that helped, but for a long time, I was kind of a one-man army. I don't want to take credit away from the brand growing and having a lot of great people around it, but in the beginning it was very few people, and I was the main graphic designer artist in the beginning. And so when I had like, let's say 7 writers to do graphics for, I was like, shit, man, I got to get this out the door. There's not a lot of time. What am I going to do? And what I learned by force was like, oh, if I work on all the boards at once, that'll be easier. Like I'll put them all on the monitor at the same time. And when I do that, I'll be able to like just hold the shift key and just and I'll work.
Because you had learned the shift key.
I learned the shift key and I step and repeat. So I started being like, oh, that's cool. I'll just take the tree logo and I'll go like boom, 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 boom. There's whatever, Kenny Hughes board, Reese Ford's board, Bill Pepper board. And it's just like, I'll just change out the name. The font's still blinking and I type the name and drag. And so I started doing this sort of like thing where I was like, oh, and it all looks really cool together and I can work on all the colors together. And I'd gone to college and I studied design and merchandising with apparel. And I started realizing like, oh, well, if you put it all together, you're going to see what it looks like in a store together. You don't want 2 blue boards that are confusing side by side.
Right.
Shop might order both of them at the same time. And then they're going to not like, let's make them pop together. And learning all that, because I started working on everything at the same time on a monitor, it really started happening where I was like doing it by accident. Again, I was thinking it through like that it would look pretty on a shop, but it was a combination of like, I got to do 7 boards at once. I think they'll all look good on the shelf like this. And I can kind of like merchandise it. And the backstory that I don't talk about a lot, because it's, again, I don't have these type of conversations often, is that when I was grocery shopping is where I start this story, is that I started realizing like, oh, candy bars look like skateboards. That's pretty cool. Bread looks like skateboards. And I'm like, oh, candy bars merchandise, great, in a candy store. And I started like looking at everything like it was what shapes look like skateboards. I'd go to the library and I'd be like, oh, the spine of a book looks like a skateboard. And I started studying the typography on a book. And if you notice on a book, the seal of the book company in a circle at the bottom, and look at an encyclopedia. And I started just like, I was like cursed by rectangles.
Oh my God.
And I would look at,
I never thought about it like that. And if you look at a lot of the original design work I was doing, I would look at like a Snickers bar and I'm like, oh, it says Snickers and it's got an outline and it's broken up at the end with a line that divides it up. I mean, you can even see it like back here, right? Like that. And so that became like this little secret sauce where I started looking. I actually took a piece of paper and I cut a little rectangle out in it. So when I would walk, I could hold the piece of paper up. Oh my gosh, there's a skateboard in there. But that the bread and the candy bars were like a little secret. I had them in my drawer. I would hide them, and I would always have these references of things shaped like bubble gum. Yeah,
Wrigley's gum. That became this thing. And what's sort of wild is that then I didn't use my art very much in the early days of Element, my drawings.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed working with other artists like Don Pendleton, Todd Francis, Nodis, all these killer artists that would come through. And I started looking at the stuff I'm describing to you. I started seeing that as like a way to like accent it. And it was a frame. Like everything was like, oh, Element's a frame for art. So instead of it being like Phillips and Powell, where their art just bled off of everything,
right?
It was like, oh, well, they're the talent and I'm the frame. So I'm going to go ahead and here's the template of the capsule and I call it the capsule that went around the board. And then the elements, the frame, and then the team writer and the Todd Francis, let's say, or Matt Irving or whomever, these guys are the art, and we're gonna like showcase them. So again, it's like you see it back here. The board was the frame, the brand was the frame, and the art was always the writer was the focus in the middle. And you'll see that happening through, decades of artwork. And as I've gotten older, it's funny, I changing that up a little bit. But speaking to the time frame you're talking about, which went on for literally decades,
Yeah.
that was like the madness kind of happening in my head
But
through that.
as a designer, as you think about that from a practical nature, you're building a business. You got a lot of great people, but you're building the business. You got a lot on your shoulders. So
Yeah,
all this other life stuff has to get done first. So it's 10
yeah,
o'clock at night. You're sitting down finally in front of your computer, even though this was the thing you swore you're going to do when you walked in the door this morning. But you've been putting out fires, and everybody knows that building a business is really just human resources. You're learning to work with so many different people, and it can take out all the fun. So late at night, you're like, I got to design 8 skateboards, and these have to go off to the printer tomorrow. We've got deadlines. And so you came up with the idea of template designing out a whole range. And the idea of the spine of the book or the candy bar, it's absolutely genius because I've seen your work 1,000 times and I never put the two together. But as soon as you said the spine of the book, I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense why there's like the dip, as you call it, or where the logo goes. Absolutely fascinating way to look at it.
yeah.
I love
Thank you.
hearing stories like this because you can love something as an outsider. But then when you meet the people that are inside that world, you learn things that make you look at it differently forever. Like when I interviewed Larry Balma, and he told me, he's like, well, me and Schmidt, I talked to him like, I'm making trucks and they're not selling. You're making skateboards, they're not selling. Let's just get into making bed frames. You'll do the wood and I'll do the metal. And I'm like, oh my God, if Dr. Schmidt and Larry Balma would have got into making bed frames instead of Schmidt sticks and tracker trucks, how different would the world be? And so you sharing this story with me that all of the element decks are in the piece of paper where you could have the skateboard view of the world. Oh my God, my life is forever different. So as you're doing element and you're building this business, spoiler alert, let's fast forward because I've only got so much of your precious time. It becomes an insanely huge company. And eventually you sell it. And don't worry, I'm not going to ask you about money. That's none of my business. But what I do want to know is you sell this company, you stay on as what were you, the CEO or creative director for another 20 years?
CEO and president,
Okay.
yeah, for 27 years or something like that.
So when you're selling it, I'm sure money is tempting and you're a family man and you got things to think about. We're going to throw that out the window because that's none of our business. But like emotionally, this had to be such a big part of your identity. And I'd love to know your relationship with Steve Douglas because you were a part of many of his other projects, but Element is largely yours. And now you've got, a publicly traded company saying, hey, we want to get involved. And you had to just like wrestle with money and opportunity and security and safety. But damn, it's my baby. Will this break it? Like, I have to think that as a professional, that probably had to be one of the hardest decisions you ever had to make. And you probably wrestled with it for quite some time. Is that a right guess? Where you're like, hell yeah, let's sell it tomorrow?
No, you're very, very right. Yeah, it was especially at the time, now every skateboard company, every flippin' action sports brand, there's very few that are owned independently, at least, wildly successful ones. I don't even know if there are any actually.
Yeah.
But, whether it's clothing or shoes or whatever it might be, it's owned by private equity, it's owned by, it's a publicly traded entity. So we were that was big time crazy stuff, and selling your company and going public was just wild. And it was a lot of different things. I'll kind of start in phases because truly it's funny because we talk about the art and all that, which I really enjoy. But when people talk to me, this is typically the discussion I'll end up in, which is cool. I don't mind because it's such a wild time.
It's just fascinating to outsiders, like you built this thing that was so culturally like relevant. And, I think every creative person struggles. Like, would I let go of some of it for some security? And and you're one of the rare people that had to actually face that.
Well, what happened is that, you mentioned Steve Douglas and Steve Douglas, when it comes to business mentors, I've had or even mentors in general with life. Steve is one of the greatest mentors I've ever had. And we're still to close to this day. I love that man. But what happened was that I had all these ideas and dreams of what Ellen would be, and we had hit a level of success. We were big, we were doing great, but there was just a lot as a very young person that I was trying to figure out how to solve, and how do I grow it? How do I, I just came from a different, I thought differently. I wanted to make clothes. I wanted to get involved with outerwear. I went to fashion design school. I wanted to make, furniture, and I just didn't care about like selling out wasn't my deal. Like I didn't care about, because to me, selling out, and even then, and I believe this to this day, it's not about, if you keep your integrity and you have, like, you're doing everything for the reasons you originally started out, or you're growing and it's all part of the path you choose, it doesn't matter how much you make. It's really like how you make it. I mean, everyone still thinks Rolex is a wonderful watch. People think that a 911 is a beautifully designed vehicle that goes fast. And as long as they keep making them great, it's part of what, they keep their integrity. And there's even examples of like, no one's asking about the integrity of this rubber band. They designed this thing to be made millions and millions of rubber bands. And so I just never had an issue with that. And people around me into this day always do. And I just don't. It doesn't faze me. I don't think about that. I just think about like, how can I get it to where I want it to go? And at the time, I wanted to make Element pay the riders better. I wanted to I looked at things like snowboarding and surfing and the NBA and hip hop and the music industry. And I'm like, why can't skaters have these things?
Yeah.
Why can't we have this stuff? Why can't we make cool clothes? Quicksilver makes cool clothes. Burton makes cool clothes. And everyone be like, you can't make clothes. You can't make girls' clothes. I'm like, why? Why can't we? Like, and I use it to this day. It's a really good example, I believe, is you look at someone like Travis Scott, like a rapper.
Yeah.
And you have a skater, like a hardcore skater, let's just say. And I say this with I'm unapologetic about this concept, is that a skater will have a real issue with another skater having sponsors that are like weird or wonky or big. They're considered a sellout. Like they ride for, can you imagine a skater rides for McDonald's or Taco Bell, or, they have an endorsement from an airline company. And people have a problem with that in skate, right?
Yeah.
But that same skater that might have a problem with another skater having a sellout sponsor will go home and comfortably sit on their couch and watch Michael Jordan play in the NBA and have Space Jam and have Travis Scott with his own flipping signature Happy Meal and get in his car after a session and crank Travis Scott and raise the flipping roof all day long.
Yeah.
And then they get out of that car cranking Travis Scott, buying Travis Scott merch, going to Travis Scott sold out concert, an incredible musician, wear a Led Zeppelin t-shirt, wear a Kiss t-shirt, and then go to the park and then go off on some kid because they want to ride for McDonald's or Red Bull or have a signature shoe on Nike. And I just don't find any logic in that. I have a real problem with it. And I've always carried that with me through my career of like, why is it okay here? And why is it not okay for us? There's nothing cool about suffering. Like there is nothing cool about that. So to me, when you talk about selling your business and all those things, I always weighed up like, what do I want to do? I want to make clothes. I want to do this. I need resources. I need people. I need partners. I need experts from other categories. I want to learn from people that are experts in apparel. And if I ever give up a piece of my, in a lot of ways, it's the opposite of greed. I had to give up pieces of my company. I had to give out shares.
Right.
I had to give out jobs. I had to give things. I had to release control to get it to where it needed to go. And with that, as I gave up control to get it to where it needed to go, it got bigger and better and greater and got more resources and made things. And I lost more and more. But so I never really. I was fortunate enough to have in the beginning of when Element was sold, and I was young and a little difficult with the people that bought the organization and partners. And by the way, when you sell your company, you do have in the beginning, and depending on how you do things, you do have control. There's contracts, there's negotiating, there's things. I remember when I first sold Element, one of the things that I had negotiated into the contract is that I had to sign every check. Like I said, I will not let this company be sold, even though you own it. I still want to sign every check. I want to know where the money's going.
That is brilliant, man.
I want to sign every check because every check equals where the money goes.
Yep.
And if I know where the money goes, because Steve Douglas and I signed all the checks, and Schmidt, I think Schmidt signed checks too, but whatever. I knew if I sold my business, they couldn't get anything over on me if I signed the checks. So I signed the checks for years. And I remember people look at my signature today, and when I go places, and they're like, "Why the hell your signature is totally illegible? You cannot." My last name is so long, and it was because I signed checks for so many years. I'd have stacks, and I'd just be like, on top of all my work, I had to sign all these damn checks. And eventually, they were like, "You can't sign these checks anymore. You're holding everything up."
Right.
Johnny's the town. He can't sign the checks, and so everything would get delayed. So something like that's a great example of people don't know the nuances of when you sell your company. How much of it did you sell? Like, how many shares do you have? Do you still sign the checks? Do you have control over X and X? So I was able to have a level of control in the beginning, and I give credit to the people I had sold the company to giving me credit. And there was an individual that when I sold the company, I never forget what he said to me. And I wish everyone would say this. They don't say this, by the way, because I can get into what happens when it sucks.
Yeah, I bet.
To sell your company, because that story is later. But in the beginning, the one thing that the top dogs that I had sold my business to said to me that I really appreciated was, "We want you to feel like you didn't sell your company. We want you to feel like you still own this company, that it's yours."
Huh.
And even when I first had sold it, or prior, when I was getting comfortable with the idea of doing it, they would say that. But what I will give credit to these people is that they said that for years. They would say, "We want you to feel like you didn't sell your company. Do you feel like you sold it?" And I would be like, "Not really." And then that became a theme in the very beginning, when I would get my balls busted by the whole industry for being a sellout. What they didn't know behind closed doors is that I was still signing the checks, and I had partners that would look at me in the eye and say, "Do you feel like you sold your company?" And I'd say, "No." And they'd say, "Good, we're doing something right." And that's why Element worked so well. And if you talk to writers and things like that from the first sort of cell generation, because what happened later is Element partnered with other companies. It became part of a larger conglomerate. Things got a little muddy. Someone came in and bought the bigger thing. And so then those people that had a lot more integrity that did say that to me were gone.
Right.
And then you're like, "Oh shit."
Yeah.
We had a good, but I always say we had a really good run. We had a great run, man.
Kind of fast forwarding up a little bit, I want to talk with you a little bit about Bam Margera. And don't worry, I'm not going to ask you any crazy questions, but I want to focus on this with Bam. Bam and Jackass and that whole world, that was like true viral success. I mean, that is going from 0 to 100 in the blink of an eye. And we all know there's bad things that come along with that. But being his skateboard company, what was it like watching that rocket ship take off, where it's like, we literally can't print enough Bam Margera decks because we can sell them to any store at a mall?
Yeah, that was crazy. I'll go back on BAM stuff because these backstories are incredible. I was a skateboard counselor, sponsored guest skater or whatever at Woodward East when I was a kid. I was probably 19 years old. Bam was a camper at Woodward as a little kid.
That's amazing.
Bam and I was like his coach or his instructor or whatever. I skated with Bam as a young adult. Bam and I connected when he was very young. I mean, he was probably 14 or something like that. And his dad and I got along, Phil, got along really well. And we had conversations, we spent quality time together. And that was crazy because then, several years later, a person by the name of Dan Wolf, who's an amazing film skate director, made all the great Element videos for one, a lot of the original Element videos, Eastern Exposure. He went on to do a lot of deluxe videos and so on. But Dan Wolf was an East Coast Philly kid. and he knew Bam too. And he helped as Bam started getting better. Dan Wolf was a big part of why Bam ended up on Element. But what was really cool about that was that Bam got on Element because we were buddies. Bam got on Element because we knew people and skated together as kids. He was not famous yet. He was just a kid that ripped. And I always want people to know that he just shredded. He was an ATV. He could just kill it in, parks and street. He was switch. He was just amazing. He got on Element because he was a great skateboarder. The whole Bam Margera like movement and Jackass and all that and CKY, that came later. We were just so lucky that we were in it for the right reasons because he was a great skateboarder and we all knew one another and it was like a little crew. So when the CKY thing is kind of where it started, when he had the CKY videos out, and I was very lucky too because I was one of the owners of 411.
Right.
So there was this magical situation, which was I was the owner of Element, or I was Element, or however you want to say that. And I was a partner in 411, and I had all this access to video and partners that were great video entrepreneurs, if you will. And then here comes along Bam with all this CKY video footage and CKY videotape, and how can we mass produce this thing and make it and get it into the skateboard world? Like you mentioned with Sick Boys and PAL videos and all that. I mean, skateboarding just was video fest. So when Bam brings CKY along and we start making that thing, it was just crazy because we just had all the right ingredients. We had a video duplication place. We had, we were doing 401. We knew how to put it into circulation. Bam was an amazing director, actor, skater. And then we just packaged it up. He wrote for Element. So then I was like, I had insight on how we would do it at 401. I had insight on how to do it with Element. I had this board graphic formulas. The heartogram was shaped like a tree logo. Like, I mean, what else could you ask for?
It was all there.
Just like, holy
shit. It was all there.
So, and Bam was a buddy and he cooperated. He was amazing. And we were friends. And so it was like, it was like this rocket ship that happened. And it started with, MTV reached out and they wanted Bam to do some stuff with a guy by the name of Johnny Knoxville out in California. And it just went mental. Bam, of course, loved Elements. So then on every episode, he was rocking Element gear because he was just into the brand, back to that natural content. It was product placement because we were like, oh shit, it's on TV. Let's send more stuff to all the boys. But no different than like you give out a bunch of stickers because you like Santa Cruz.
Right.
So it was just this organic, back to that product placement that was organic. Here's like Ryan Dunn and Steve-O and Johnny Knoxville and all these guys just, of course they're going to, open up a giant box of Element shit in Bam's kitchen at the castle. Bam's just throwing out Element gear and they're all like, sick, I love Element. And it was just this crazy situation. And it was just this rocket ship because you had a combination of all the Element gear in the shows that was it wasn't totally intentional. It was just like, let's hook these guys up. They're super cool.
Right.
Bam's name, the name Bam and skateboarding we made more Bam skateboards than I think it was insane. It was just insane.
I just was looking at that and I was thinking, from a logistics point of view, Bama's on a short list. There's Bam, there's Tony Hawk. There's just a couple of these guys that got a little bit bigger than the sport. Like Tony Hawk's name has been on Jeopardy before as a what is question, And so when you have one of those people, the infrastructure you have to keep up with that tremendous amount of sales and to do everything, like it's just like such a wild part of a career that's already really fascinating. Moving forward, because I don't have a lot of your time, you now are at a moment in your life where it seems like, I'm just projecting, but it seems like you went on this wild ride. You started all these DIY, punk skate companies and brands with all your best buds. You did the Element thing. It sounds like eventually that it wasn't fun anymore and you bailed. But it seems like right now you're in a really cool part of your life where you like starting projects and you have a lot of projects you're involved in, and the commonality between all of them is positivity and change, which to me says you are a skateboarder, because the community of being a skateboarder never ever leaves you. So from USA Skateboarding to the Heart Supply, which is an amazing concept of help getting skateboards and supplies to kids that can't afford them, which I was actually one of those kids once. It's just like, what an awesome third act in your life to be able to do all of these different things, not because you have to, but because you want to. And I think that's a really, to me, that's the definition of success.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, I think the part, I'll actually get a little teary-eyed on this one, but what happened was, well, a lot of things. One, my father, God bless him, and he's no longer with us. He hated skateboarding.
Mine too.
Yeah. He hated skateboarding. He didn't support it at all when I was a kid. He just could not stand it. Yeah. And we figured all that out later. But I didn't have support as a kid when it came to my endeavors. And not a lot of people around me believed in what I wanted to do. And the irony is, even today they don't.
Yeah.
It's funny how that works, whether, and I'm not trying to compare myself to Elon Musk or Steve Jobs, but you hear these people's battles, and Steve Jobs walks in a room and, he's got all this crazy success and he's just trying to improve the iPhone, and people still say it's impossible. I find that astounding that, you have these people, whether it's myself with skateboarding or other people in other fields, scientists, you name it. And there's always these people around them that are like, nope. Like, bro, I've done this a lot. Like, I think it might work, actually. Yeah. Why I say that is that, I had a family, and I have a beautiful wife and a wonderful family. And as I started getting older, especially with childhood memories, you're like, okay, when I was 17, what was happening? And I look around and I'm like, life was difficult. My father hated skateboarding. It was a battle, man. It was really gnarly.
Been there.
Life was rough. And I've worked my way through it. But when I had children, I would say to myself, well, what's my kid doing when they're 16, 15, 14, 17? Like, what's going on right now? And I look at their life like almost like it's my life. And I'm like, well, how can I make their life not like my life? Like, I don't want that to happen to my kid. Like, I don't want to be the dad that hated skating. I don't want to be the boss that was a dick that never said thank you. Like, I hated that. And so when I have employees now, I'm like, how do I say thank you? How do I make them feel like their job, they love their job? Like, how do I say they're great and make sure to remind them daily that they're special and that things are awesome and they're talented and they can work through this, and good job, good job, good job. Thank you. I love you. I'm sorry. Thank you. I love you. I'm sorry. Like, I just don't feel like those are things that people do enough, and say it to your kid and say it to your workers. And as I had children, the thing that I got that was heavy, and this was a big reason the element thing kind of exploded, was that my kid is a skater. My kid is my son's name is Camp. And my wife is a skate mom. She's an amazing skateboard entrepreneur. She's the woman that brings pizza to the park. She's the mom that everybody wanted to have when we were kids, that supported skating. Yeah. And what I started realizing as I had my own child and my own daughter that's like a skate Betty. I mean, I have everything you think about with a skating life, I somehow have it as an adult. I'm the skate dad. My wife's the skate mom. My son's a skater, and my daughter's like, loves skate community. She loves going to the contest. She's not a skater, but she loves skate. So what I realized was that I wasn't seeing the gratitude for that. I was like, would I let my kid get in the van? Would I let my kid go to the Tampa Am contest and go to the party afterwards? What would I do? I started looking at things very differently than even how I looked at it with Nija as a kid, or, Bam as a kid. Like, now these are my kids.
Right. That makes it a whole different ballgame.
And I'm like, what's happening right now? And then I even see when my son was on Element, believe it or not, my kid was on Element. He was a Twigs kid. My son is an amazing skateboarder. He's sponsored by Adidas, Thunder, Spit. He backsmiths and backlit down Hollywood 16. He's gnarly.
That's awesome.
And so when I was seeing all this, I was like, hold on a minute. There's not a lot of what's happening right now? I want my kid to have what I didn't have. And not that he's going to get spoiled, but I want it to be safe. I want it to be fun. I want it to be friendly. I want it to be like, yeah, there shouldn't be two separate vans in skate where there's the stoner van and the goody two shoes van and these things that are part of our culture. You shouldn't be scared for your kid to go to a skate park at 10 o'clock at night.
Right.
You shouldn't like that. We need to get past, we need to evolve like brands evolve, like people's bank accounts evolve in skate. Tony Hawk Pro Skater has evolved. Tony Hawk has evolved. Our culture needs to evolve too. And I was seeing as I got older that it wasn't evolving around me. I wanted it. I mean, certain parts of it are, of course, but I was like, how can I contribute to the evolution of skateboarding on another level that's not just about my pocketbook? How can I contribute to it so my son's safe, my daughter's safe, the people around me, my team riders and new brands? How can I give back through, the Olympic movement and USA skateboarding and contests? How can I give back through like with Chala, this project I'm doing out in Mexico with a beautiful town that's being built out to have skateboarding amenities and things like that. How can I do it where we give back and the skate obstacles are built with integrity and just really making sure that as skateboarding grows, how can we make sure that I call them a pedestrian, right? Like, how can we make sure it's not dominated by pedestrians and that the skateboarding culture has skateboarders benefiting and helping and integrated into the success of the sport. And at the same time, what we know where it can be safe and be healthy, we know.
Yeah.
We know how to do that. And it's our responsibility to evolve it correctly. And that kind of became my mission. I don't know if it's like intentional or it's subconscious, but I'm having, you're right. I'm happy. I've never been happier. I love what I do. I'm all about creativity and just I want to just make sure I give back to the thing that gave me such a great life. I mean, it's like, I'm so lucky. I'm just so damn lucky.
I mean, it looks like a really good career when, act 1 was adventure, act 2 was make some money, and act 3 was make a difference. And when you look at it that way, it's a really awesome career. I was lucky that when I got into skateboarding, I found the punk rock hardcore scene, which then also got me into straight edge. So when it was smashing 40s and wearing the huge pants, I'm like, no thanks. I'm from the Thrasher magazine, like punk mindset, and I love hip hop, but there was a moment where the hip hop infused skateboarding kind of took that punk vibe out and it kind of made it something for a while in the mid 90s that I didn't recognize as skateboarding. And that kind of with my age, that aligned with, getting a car and getting a job and having girls in your life and all that stuff. But don't worry, I found my way back home to skateboarding. I'm going to end with just like a really quick story I want to share with you because I think that you'll get something out of this and you've given me so much today, but I'm just like you. Mom and dad didn't understand skateboarding. They wanted a clean cut kid that played traditional sports, and that just was not for me. And I love skateboarding. I was never into skateboarding rebelliousness because I thought it would piss my parents off. I've never been that way. I was like, why can't they root for the thing that I love? I'm not doing it to make them mad. I'm doing it because I love it. And you talked about your wife being the skate mom. We had a skate mom in our neighborhood. And, I had to do chores. I had to mow the yard. I had to clean up around the house, but I didn't get an allowance because dad was a truck driver and money was tight. So I always got everybody's leftover board. I had the 7-ply Powell Peralta Bonite board where the Bonite was coming off of it. My first pro deck was a Psycho stick with no nose. Like it was like a quarter of an inch to where the truck was bolted in. And, and I had to like sometimes like skate on like a Veriflex deck or a Nash board and get made fun of. And, I had to go into the skate shop and leave my deck outside and hide it in a bush because I couldn't carry my deck into the skate shop. Like it was just, just huge embarrassment. And it was things that taught me character. But this skate mom in our neighborhood was like, she's like, Mark's such a good kid and everybody else gets new decks all the time. And he's always happy. Fuck, I'm going to cry. He's always happy for everybody else when they get their new decks for Christmas. And he never gets bitter about it. So I didn't know this. We went to the skate shop, and like always, I thought one of my friends was going to get a new skate deck, and I was just going to be there rooting them on, and maybe I'd get the old scraps. And she told all the kids in the neighborhood, like, whatever dollar you give, I'll match it. And I got my first ever complete deck. And it was a Lucero, Ricky Barnes. And I remember getting to just pick one off the wall because I always went there and I was just like, man, if I could pick one of these decks, which one would I pick? And it was the greatest moment of charity and goodwill that had ever been given to me at the age of 15. So when I see you doing the Heart Supply, and I see you doing USA Skateboarding, and I see you doing things that can bring other kids. Fuck, I am losing it today, Johnny. I didn't know I was going to go off the deep end. But
I almost did it a minute ago. Don't feel bad. Hey, but you're making a great, your point, and I want you to finish, but what it is look at what skateboarding does to us as grown-ass men.
It does.
It's incredible what you're talking about because it is that impactful. And I mean, shit. Yeah, keep going. It's a Ricky Barnes. I stayed at his house. He was a badass.
Oh man,
I was scared shitless of that guy.
I love the Lucero decks because they just had such a nice shape to them. And I met John Lucero briefly outside of the Bluegrass Aggression session when pro skateboarders came to Louisville, Kentucky, and it blew our mind. But anyways, I was once a kid that needed a helping hand to further pursue skateboarding, and seeing that you do that. I just was once the customer that you're now serving, which is that kid that just, with a little bit of guidance, maybe they can find skateboarding, which will lead them into music and art and culture and defining a personality and making lifelong friends. And when I look back at my entire life, which I feel very blessed to have lived, to have been a professional dreamer, it all came back to Dale Pierce moving in my neighborhood and seeing him do a ho-ho and be like, what the fuck? He's doing a handstand and his skateboard's still on his feet? How does that work? So Johnny, thank you so much for letting me passionately talk about something that I love and going down memory lane and also just learning from you. And now, now when I look at an Element skateboard, which by the way, my ride of choice right now is when I was on tour or speaking somewhere, somebody gave me a Element Stinger as a gift. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know that one. I was around for the Stinger for sure.
And that is my Broken Bones Brigade skateboard, where my rule now is I don't go above the coping because it really fucking hurts at this age when you fall into a pool.
Well, your knowledge of skating is incredible, but I would just say that as we stop this podcast, which by the way has been just amazing, really fun.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. I always want to make sure I say this because it's one of these things where I've been real lucky with being surrounded by amazing people. A lot of it was luck. A lot of it was, just really being in the right place, right time. I don't want to take too much credit away from myself because I don't want people to think it's all just easy. It's not. But, I've really just been surrounded by hardworking people. Sometimes I did good things. Sometimes I made bad decisions. And, looking back, it's all, I suppose I wouldn't change a thing, but it's the people around me. It's the skaters. It's the Ricky Barnes, the John Luceros, the Nadas Capases, all these people, the Matt Irvings, et cetera, that I was a bit of a curator of all this wonderful shit. But like you say a minute ago, it's this community and how people give back, whether it's through work and skating and, obviously pro skaters, a big part of that. And I've just been, man, just so grateful. And that's why I want to give back. But your story is incredible. And we all have those. But I'm just always happy to tell the story and be, I guess, a bit of a mouthpiece for the industry.
I mean, it's just one of those things that, because I saw another kid do it, it forever changed my life, and it's been so much fun as doing the podcast to get to talk to you and so many of these other people that I only knew through a magazine, and it's sometimes you hear really phenomenal, emotional stories. And then sometimes you hear once again, another Larry Bama story is well, we didn't feel like we were getting good ad placement in Thrasher. So we started Transworld so we could get better ad placement. I'm like, what? That, you want to talk about telling hey, by the way, kid, there's no such thing as Santa Claus. I was like, what? That's why you guys made Transworld to get better ad placement? He's like, yeah, that's why we made it twice as thick so we could put twice as many ads. And I was like, this is amazing. But Johnny, Such a fun time talking with you. I cannot wait to get to hang out with you at Into the Woods in real life and hear
That'll be
and
fun.
hear your talk and just get to learn more from you and get to hang out and I'll let you in on this other little secret since I cried and opened up in front of you. Till this day, if I'm sitting on a toilet, instead of looking at Instagram, I would rather take these two fingers, and if I can reach over to the sink, I'm for sure skating a bowl while I'm sitting on the bowl. And it's just like a habit from 10 years old that I can't let go. And I have done so many rock and roll fakies while letting one fall out the backside.
Oh, that's really good. Like, so you got, hey, if you ever start doing become an interior decorator or a designer, that should be a thought. Make the sink always got to be within an arm's reach, and a tech deck and a sink that has good transition and possibly coping.
And like if we could do like a channel or something that makes it fun to do air kick flips over the top of, that's even better. That's even better. Although when you're using your wrist, you can only turn, like, still can't do a 360 because the wrist only goes so far.
Oh, that's good. Well, appreciate it, Mark.